Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. Sometimes I feel like we've reached the end of history. Not the end of the world, but the end of that kind of linear unraveling of culture where each new development is a response to what came before it. Today, everything is happening all at once, which means that artists have a lot of freedom to find their style using all kinds of references and to choose what they want to do from an enormous menu of influences. And something that might have once seemed old-fashioned can actually resonate as new again. I think that Rachael and Vilray are a perfect example of that kind of thinking.
Of all the lips I know I've kissed, I can recall just two. A sea of eyes I've hypnotized, but I can see just two.
Rachael and Vilray's new record, I Love a Love Song, comes out this week. Rachael Price is best known as the singer in the band Lake Street Dive. She and Vilray met at college 2 decades ago, but it would take them years before they discovered their mutual love of the classic American songbook. We spoke recently about how this project came about, how they approach making original music in the mold of classics that are nearly 100 years old, the art and craft of songwriting, recording, and singing this music. Third-story.com is the place to go to visit the archive, find hundreds of conversations with writers, artists, singers, producers, and members of the creative class, including some of Rachael and Vilray's friends and collaborators like John Batiste, Larry Goldings, John Lampley, Theo Katzman, and actually every member of the band Wolfpack, Ryan Lerman, Louis Cato, Caleb Hawley, Monica Martin, Richard Julian, and more. They're all there in the archive. Visit wbgo.org/studios to check out all their award-winning content, including this program, which is made in partnership with them since 2022. And then it's patreon.com/thirdstorypodcast to get involved in a deeper way. Here's me talking to Rachael and Vilray. First things first, I had to learn how to pronounce their names.
Love is just we two. In love is just we two.
Rachael and Vilray, it's so nice to meet you both.
Likewise. I just want to step in and say it's Vilray.
Thank you. I have to admit, I spent the morning practicing to not do it. And of course,
No, it's fine. I spent the morning practicing too. It's a weird name.
What is the origin of that name?
It's like French from a million years ago, like French-American fur trapping people. They named their kids weird things like Vilray.
Did you spend your life making that correction? First day of school every year?
Yeah, I kind of stopped making... I have friends from kindergarten who call me Vilray.
Yeah.
And I don't bother with it. I've only sort of started correcting people just because now it maybe matters in terms of business or something like that. But on my day-to-day, I don't care at all.
The combination of the music that you make and the mystery of your name, using only your first name, and then the sort of...
How do you say it?
Yeah, secret pronunciation creates such an air of mystique around you. And
that's what I'm going for.
Yeah, well, so that's where I want to start. Exactly. I mean, it is 2023 when this record comes out. And you are very committed to making music that sounds like it's nearly 100 years old, that comes from really the 20th century. It's kind of almost out of time and from another dimension, and your whole vibe reinforces that.
Yeah, I mean, we put the music out there, and of course, I'm not insane. I know how it comes across, but I don't think about it too much as something that is anachronistic. I love that music, and I love what that music can channel as far as emotion and humor and harmonic motion and melody and language and the music of language. I love all that stuff that is kind of built into that idiom in a way that is receivable by an audience, without having to explain much to them. So I understand that it kind of comes across as like, oh, I think I recognize this from my grandmother's living room or something like that. But it's really just music that I like, and I think it kind of is a good conduit for a lot of things that I like about music.
When you started playing music and writing music, were you drawn to this style and genre and era, or did you come to it later on?
I kind of came to it later on. When I was first writing music, I was writing kind of free jazz. It was very influenced by Ornette Coleman, and particularly kind of the humor and the childlike quality of a lot of his writing. I say childlike, just kind of very singable in terms of a lot of the melodic elements of Ornette's writing. So that's kind of where I started off. And then it wasn't until my late 20s that I kind of got into learning a lot of obscurities of the Tin Pan Alley era. And since I was playing these obscurities, I kind of was like, well, I could throw in originals and nobody would really know the difference between the obscurity and the original, because I'm not singing all of me. I'm singing some weird Fats Waller song. So if I wrote another song that kind of was in the same dimension as the Fats Waller song, then nobody would know, and it would kind of be a fun exploration for me as a songwriter. So that's kind of how it started.
You mentioned in some of the notes that you wrote about the record, at some point there's a comment that you make that so many of the songs from that style, from that era, were written for shows, and so they had all the character, and they were written to tell a story, to help move a story forward. And when you're writing these one-offs, you kind of have to do the extra work of creating an entire universe and a character who's only going to live for 3.5 minutes.
Yeah, that's true. But I think the other way of looking at it is that you don't have to give the whole backstory. Those songs they do exist to further a narrative, but they also exist to attack a single thesis. And as long as you're attacking a single thesis authentically and in the voice of somebody who feels like an authentic character, even if they're a little absurd or a little heightened the way these theater characters were, I think it comes across as you're filling in the blanks on what this story is, where this song is coming in the musical, or is this the big ballad, or is this a secondary character singing kind of a lesson song or whatever?
So the two of you met at the New England Conservatory almost 20 years ago.
That's true.
Yeah.
Tell me, what was the milieu that you were in at NEC when you met? What was the scene that you guys came out of?
I got to NEC sort of wanting to be as much of a sort of traditional jazz singer as possible. I had been listening to Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan, Billie Holiday and Peggy Lee, Doris Day. I watched a lot of old movie musicals growing up. And so that was kind of how I was entering that time of study, and had also spent the last several years learning as many American songbook standards as possible. I had been taking classes at a jazz school in Nashville that were just repertoire classes. So it was like we would do 6 weeks of Cole Porter and 6 weeks of Jerome Kern, and then we would do 6 weeks of Rodgers and Hart. And so I was like really armed with song when I got there, and then sort of realized, first of all, I was the only singer in our year. So I was already occupying, I guess kind of a role in the class that not many other people were occupying. And then also quickly realized that like jazz, I was 17, so I had a narrow view of what jazz was, and I was from Tennessee, so it's like I wasn't like going out to clubs and hearing different types of jazz. I'd never really been to that many live jazz shows. Anyway, I just didn't know the scene that I was going into, and I got there and there were all these like, to me, like very cool kids like Vilray that like grew up in New York and like went to LaGuardia, and I was like, these people are into like a very different type of music than I am. Like I'd never listened to free jazz, for example, and like was all of a sudden put in like ensembles where they were like, okay, improvise freely, and I was like, I don't even understand like this language, this context, I don't know what this means musically. And in some ways sort of instantly became a little bit embarrassed about my yearnings to just sing songs and be sort of more of a traditional jazz singer. So I sort of kept it hidden while I was there, which is maybe why Vilray and I didn't discover that we both loved this type of music until, a good, I don't know, however many
10
years after.
Later or something.
10 years later, yeah. We didn't like discover this shared love in school, even though we both grew up listening and trying to emulate this music. So, it enabled me to sort of, I found Lake Street Dive formed, and I tried a lot of different stuff. And in the end, I have no quips about it. I think it was a great time at NEC, but it is kind of funny how I sort of felt a little silly about singing jazz, and then 15 years later, feel like I've refound it.
How do you adjust, Rachael, to the genre or the style or the codes of the music that you're singing? I mean, are you adjusting, or is the song kind of leading the way for you? The way it's so identifiably you when you sing with Vilray, and also when you sing with Lake Street Dive. And I've heard some of your jazz solo recordings also, and you're there. It's obviously you every time. But I mean, there is a little bit of a pivot that takes place. Is it conscious, or is the music kind of leading it?
It's at this point, I would almost say it's not conscious, just in the sense that I'm not starting the song and I'm thinking like, oh, I'm going to pronounce the word slightly differently. I'm going to place it differently in my face. There's a different technical approach to singing, music from different eras. And, singers have changed really just physically how they've sung over the decades. And so it's not done with a ton of consciousness at this point, but definitely it's come from years of effort to identify what those differences are.
That is really interesting. With the project with Vilray, when you sing, obviously the writing is evocative of another time. The recording is evocative of another time. The arrangement is evocative of another time. But there's also something that cues that this is an older way of singing in the way that the words are enunciated and certain consonants are hit in certain ways. But what you're saying is also some of it is where the voice is placed, in the throat, in the mouth.
Yeah, entirely. Yeah, sort of vocal placement over the years has changed, and it's different by genre, whether you're singing like pop or classical or R&B. And accent has changed just drastically. I mean, I feel like that's like an ever-changing thing, especially these days with the way that recorded music is so fast and that there's so much stuff constantly. Singers are always hearing like new voices, and then we're sort of, we can't help but mimic them. So if you sort of think backwards in time, the amount of music that somebody was able to hear just, going about their life, you realize that it's less and less and less and less. It's like growing up, how many singers did Frank Sinatra listen to? Mm-hmm. Or like how many singers did Ella Fitzgerald hear, or sounds did she hear? And so, it makes things, it makes the style of singing sort of, I guess it's sort of just, it gets more and more and more diverse, and all sorts of things happen with it. So when I'm singing with Vilray and singing these songs, I do kind of want to play the game of like, I don't want to do things with my voice that like the singers of the time hadn't yet quite heard. And I do put in inflections and sounds that are more modern. I try and do that with a good amount of intention and almost like a bit of a wink. I'm trying to like tell the audience, like, I know what I'm doing. I know what's up.
Well, there's a bit of winking all around, I mean, I think it takes a minute to get there because it presents as, I don't even want to say throwback, but so classic. But I think maybe one of the places, in addition to what you're describing, Rachael, is where it happens is in the humor of the writing. Every now and then there'll be a lyric or a joke or something in the presentation that feels more modern. In the first single you released, it's my cousin's best friend's boyfriend or something like that. Is that my best friend's cousin's boyfriend?
Yeah, my cousin's best friend's boyfriend once nearly cooked a meal.
My cousin's best friend's boyfriend once nearly cooked a meal. So is a good man real?
There's something in the construction of that is modern to me.
I mean, it's so available to anybody to interpret. I definitely have different opinions about where the modernity is coming in and where I'm keeping it at bay, maybe is the phrase. But people do bring up kind of their own ideas of what a modern thing is. I remember on the last record, there was a lyric, once was agoraphobic, Times Square would make me gasp.
Once was agoraphobic, Times Square would make me gasp. I let full trains go past. With you, I feel alone at last.
The use of the word agoraphobic hit some people as like modern, but it's an old idea, that's like a 19th century condition or whatever.
My great-grandmother was accused of being agoraphobic. I was always told my great-grandmother lived in the house with my father and she wouldn't leave the house.
I think agoraphobia probably dates back to the caveman.
Yeah.
Somebody else brought up the idea that like there was something of a throwback in could be the bottom of the ninth, which is a lyric in Any Little Time. And, there's nothing more constant in terms of time than baseball. Any little time could be the bottom of the ninth, or in the highest tent in Kathmandu. If you don't love me, then every little time I'll cry. I think people just kind of they hear what they hear, and I don't want to get in the middle of that. But I'm not thinking too much about like this is modern, this is old fashioned, this is timeless, this is I just don't want to write anything that makes somebody scratch their chin and be like, I don't know if I know what that means. That's basically my line. I don't want to be mystifying.
But what about, for example, any acknowledgement of technology or modern life?
It's true. People always talk about, I've heard a lot of like screenwriters talk about how the cell phone ruined plots because you can just solve so many problems. There's no miscommunication anymore. You can just pick up the phone and clarify anything. And so you can't have the wacky situations that Buster Keaton gets into where he's like trying to run to his wedding in time, and has to run all over town because he could just call and say, I'm not going to be there on time. So, I think I do try to cut out things that confuse the timeline maybe. I do kind of want to maintain the idea that it's like, wait, is this a new song? Is this an old song? Like, I write new songs because I feel like it's important for us, Rachael and I, to be starting a new relationship with the listener. I don't want to be competing with a Frank Sinatra song. I don't at this moment want to be playing In the Wee Small Hours in the Morning because somebody has a relationship to that song and somebody has a relationship to the way it's sung. And this is such an opportunity that is so freeing for both of us, I think, to kind of take this language and apply it to new subject matter. So I do try to keep the lyrics a little vague as far as the time goes, but I don't intentionally try to put language in there that makes you say, oh yeah, that's so old fashioned, or oh yeah, that's like a little bit of a wink at modernity. I just try to keep it like a little neutral as far as time goes.
Yeah, neutral. I think that's a great word. That thing about building a relationship with the audience that is unburdened by any of the material that we have a relationship with, I think is really effective because it does give the feeling of unearthing something that we hadn't found before. It's like finding a time capsule in a funny way, except that you also have the benefit of having it be contemporary. You can go and see it. There are videos of it. You guys are very much alive right now. I can actually attest to that. And so if you're not generating new material, the only way to sort of interact with this kind of music is to go back and listen to old records, which I get the feeling you've done a lot of, spending time in the history of the music and placing yourself in it or seeing yourself in it.
I definitely have spent a lot of time listening to music and old music in particular, and I have a great record collection, and I love this music, and I hope that comes across in the listening to it. And sometimes it's funny to read YouTube comments where people say things like, what is this music? People are like introduced to it via me singing some song of mine, and that's I don't know. It's kind of gratifying to put it in the context of the living and hope that they are going back and listening to Merle Travis and listening to, Frank Sinatra and listening to everybody. But I don't worry too much about where I fit in the context of that old stuff. I just try to take the stuff. I try to have hard opinions about what I like about it and try to apply the lessons of the stuff that I like to the writing of it and to the playing of it and to the singing of it. And when Rachael and I are talking about approaches to have an opinion about who might sing this song or where this song sits in the musical, or, and Rachael has opinions about it too, spoken or unspoken to me. And it's a lovely experience to kind of hear these songs come alive for myself on stage or in the recording studio, and hear living people apply their own love and their own lessons that they've learned from old records to this stuff. And it kind of doesn't matter what the original impetus was for me, unless it helps to clarify some confusion for them.
Considering this is a project that is the two of you, Rachael, at what point do you come into contact with the material, and how do you approach it when you're given a new song? I mean, are you talking to Vilray as he's writing it, before he's writing it? Is he singing it to you after it's finished? And what's it like for you when you have to start to kind of make it your own?
Mostly Vilray sends me songs pretty much completed. And earlier, when we started playing, he would often give me a singer that he had in mind for the song. The first original song we ever did of Vilray's was a song we've never recorded called These Tears. And he told me he'd sort of written it for Billie Holiday. So I had her in mind when I started to approach the song.
I thought that we would climb the hilltops, walk between the raindrops too. But since you're gone, my cheeks are seldom dry. These tears are all I have of you.
That's worked really well for us because it's just a big leap forward into understanding. It's a shorthand to say, okay, I got it. Now, I think we sometimes talk a little bit more just about character, the specific character of the person singing that specific song. So for example, Even in the Evening, I think we didn't really discuss a specific singer, just more about the mood, the tone of the person singing the song. So more approaching it like from the perspective of it's a musical and we're sort of dropping into a scene.
Not even in the evening, he can't find the time. Those hours once were mine, from 5 to 9.
All those things are really, really helpful. And anytime Vilray gives me a note, it does wonders for it. I think I take direction pretty well from him. It's really fun for me to get notes and delve into the nuances of how a song would be approached as far as the rhythm of it or the character.
Something that's really, I think, apparent from the first notes when you two sing together is the way you phrase together your blend and there's, like I was saying earlier, there's certain enunciations, certain kind of accent phrasing things that happen. Does that come from singing a lot? Does that come from a kind of forensic analysis of how it's going to be sung and approached? How do you get that great blend?
I think there's a certain amount that we got lucky with, because as soon as we started harmonizing, I was sort of surprised that it worked as well as it has. One thing we learned early on when we were just playing in small clubs is that we needed to look at each other. So we spent many years, the 6 years that we've been a band, I'd say the first few, we were sort of looking deeply into each other's eyes and mouths, singing onto one microphone, which I think helped a lot. But the tonal matching, I think, just comes from the shared understanding of how this music is approached in the face, like what part of your face it's coming out of. And that's how we can blend so well together. And, it kind of comes and goes. Sometimes we'll come back after not having sung together for a little while, and I'll realize that I'm sort of tonally like still in a Lake Street Dive zone and have to kind of adjust.
Now everybody's talking about me, 'cause you were dirty me up just to get yourself clean. Get yourself clean.
It's sort of a mysterious and magical thing, two people trying to blend their voices.
So what part of the mouth does the old style singing come from?
Not to get super technical and boring, but one of the biggest differences between singing from the 40s and 50s to sort of the pop singing that I do now, which I'd say the technique is more came more into style in the 70s and the 80s, is there's a mixture of a very forward placement, which means that you're sort of putting all the resonance in the front of your face or in your nose. But there's simultaneously you're keeping also the sound back and round. You're keeping your soft palate sort of raised. You're doing this thing where you have the sound very forward in a very sort of speech-like part of your voice, but you're also employing some sort of techniques that are more classical, where you're keeping the note kind of resonating. Whereas in sort of modern pop singing, it's like it's much easier to just sing everything super forward and get rid of that sort of backwards resonance, if that makes sense. I mean, you can sort of think of it just as like we speak more these days in a more just like forward, kind of lower sort of speaking, and there was a bit of a rounder sound that came from that people were speaking with in the 40s and the 50s, and just an overall resonance that was more employed. I think, I don't know, singers might hear this and be like, what is she talking about?
If we get letters, it's a good sign. It means people are listening to the interview.
Yeah, I want people to disagree.
Yeah.
Be like, she's full of it.
It seems like another piece of this is that the types of recordings that you are making are in conversation with a time when crooners were born because there were microphones that they could get close to and sing softly. And on your recordings, you really love that sound of the vocal way in front of the band, that dry, no echo, the pillowy ribbon microphone sound, and then the band is kind of like you kind of envision the band behind you. I'm very taken by the way these records sound. Particularly this new record sounds really legitimately like an old record, that total commitment to that kind of recording.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear you describe it that way, because Dan Knobler, who engineered and produced this record, and myself, we had a lot of discussions in the months before we went into the studio about how much I love that sound in the 50s. There's a particular Lotta Lenya record that I was listening to a lot. That's like Lotta Lenya sings Kurt Weill, and I think it was recorded in the UK in the 50s. And it's like incredible how close to the mic she is and how far back the band sounds. It's a magical sound.
Ja, da kann man sich doch nicht gleich hinlegen. Ja, da muss man kalt und herzlos sein. Ja, da könnte so viel geschehen. Ach, da gibt's überhaupt nur Nein. Nein.
The name of this record is I Love a Love Song, and I wanted it to be about the songs. Obviously we were getting a lot of incredible musicians on here, and we were recording in this kind of storied LA studio, and Rachael is just an incredible voice. So everybody, the humanity and the inventiveness of these musicians, it comes across. But I was just kind of hoping that the songs would come across. Obviously I can't compete with Kurt Weill, but there's something about that record. Lotta Lenya is so specific and such an incredibly distinctive voice, but like she's putting across these songs that Kurt Weill wrote. And there's something about that sound of just like having this whole room resonating, and the feel that the band is kind of like over there somewhere, and the idea that this voice is like not quite whispering, but like right by your ear, like it's a love song to you, like it's a sad song about you, like it's the joke is between you, the listener, and the singer. And it's such a special sound that somehow is, I don't know, it's a little passé, or it's gone. I think it's difficult, as you say, to kind of give over to that idea that it's just like, okay, we're going to set up enough microphones that we capture this thing, and we're not going to worry about the ego of the drummer or the piano player, or the bass player, we want to hear them. We want to hear exactly what they're doing. But like the ego should be the room. The room is kind of the star of this.
Yeah.
It's the container for this music.
Vilray, I have to ask this question that I read in, your bio, that you had, after NEC, you had stopped thinking of having a professional career and you had another job, and then you had an injury that took you away from your day job and brought you back to music. I may be misunderstanding it, but more or less that's
more or less that's it. Yeah.
Can I ask, what was the job?
I was working sort of in the offices above a manufacturer. They made high-end lighting fixtures for museums and rich folk and other institutions. And I first worked in the accounting department, and then I worked in the customer service department. And I did that for 12 years.
Please tell me you had a customer service related finger injury.
No, I didn't. I had a protest related finger injury. Rachael was with me, actually, and so was Bridget Carney.
That's right.
And it was pouring rain, and we were protesting police violence, and I slipped in the middle of 2nd Avenue down in the Lower East Side, and I broke my pinky, which is a very minor injury. So it's kind of funny that it's like become this Genesis story. But it was my pinky on my right hand. So it was the one finger that I could break without consequence as a guitar player who finger picks. It's the one finger I never use. But it did kind of just feel like a message, from the universe that my days were numbered, as all of ours are. And the days without arthritis maybe are numbered, and the days without, whatever gets in the way of expressing yourself musically. There was something different about the fact that I was, for a month or two, unable to play because of some physical limitation as opposed to just kind of laziness or lack of drive. And it sort of, kicked me in the butt. And I saw a friend and he said, well, you look more depressed than usual. And I was like, yeah, it's something about this cast and not being able to play guitar ever. And, and he was like, well, I'm going to book you for a gig in 2 months. And so just get ready for it in your brain. And that was very generous of him. And so I kind of did that. And I was like listening to a lot of tunes and I was figuring them out kind of, just with my left hand. And I was just learning a bunch of Fats Waller tunes and Billie Holiday tunes and Rudy Valley stuff and kind of preparing for this 45-minute set. I hadn't played a set since I was 19 years old.
Really?
Yeah. No, I mean, I was really not, I was never on a path to be a professional musician. I went to college, it's true, but it quickly became too expensive and wasn't making sense for me. So,
So you had gone to LaGuardia, then you went to college for music. Did you finish music college?
No. I did a semester each in my freshman and sophomore, in quotes, years. And I was not very studious. I loved the experience, and I met a lot of incredible people, including Rachael and the members of Lake Street Dive, and played fun things and wrote fun things. But I really wasn't on a path to playing music on any level until my late 20s, when I kind of slapped myself awake with the help of some friends.
So you have this 45-minute set. You've got to get it together. Your fingers bend in a cast, but you somehow pull it off, and you go up and you play the 45-minute set. And what do you remember about that set? Was it an aha moment on stage?
The real aha moment was once I got out of the cast, I went and busked in the Metropolitan Station on the G train in Brooklyn. And something about singing into a resonant space like that and singing these old songs in an era when there was no cell service down in the subway. You just sing these like love songs, but like I say, it wasn't like All of Me. It was, it was weirder songs. And people would come up to me, particularly young women, and kind of in tears and be like, I was just broken up with, or I'm falling in love, or whatever. And I was like, wow, this music, like, it connects on some level, where if I was singing a song by Journey, even if it was a similar kind of message, there's just something about the nostalgia of it and sort of the purity of the lyrics that really captures the way humans actually feel about things, I think. I was really struck by how it impacted people enough that they would come up to me and give me $15 and say, I really felt something just now 18 minutes that I was waiting for the train and listening to you. And I think that was the moment when I was like, wow, there's something here that I think I'm discovering for the first time about how music that speaks to the singer is translated to the listener. That I think is a mature realization that comes later than just studying it or just writing it for your own sort of pleasure.
Rachael, you have done a lot of study. I mean, just talking to you about your understanding of what singers go through and how you think about it, it's a very deliberate and cultivated. But your relationship with singing goes back to childhood, and you grew up in a family where music was a spiritual pursuit. It wasn't just a professional thing. It wasn't specifically $15 in 18 minutes, which Vilray, I know it's not all about the money. But Rachael, I wonder if you could talk to me about the role of music in your life growing up.
My dad is a musician, and my parents, when they met, they actually sang in a little band together. And it was my family is Baha'i, and they had a little group that sang music that was inspired by the Baha'i writings. So my dad, he's a very versatile musician. He came into music playing fiddle and mandolin, and then he studied classical composition and conducting. And so growing up, he conducted Baha'i choirs. And then when I was very young, he started doing these tours with big Baha'i choir groups throughout Europe and throughout the States, and he would bring me on them. So yeah, I was always singing in choir, and yeah, often in a religious context. And our very little small Baha'i community in Hendersonville, Tennessee, had several other musicians in it. There was the band Seals and Crofts lived down the Seals and the Crofts, they lived down the street from us. And there's this country singer, his name was Dan Seals, was also in our community. So gatherings were very musical. There's a lot of other songwriters also there because Hendersonville is a suburb of Nashville. So everyone was kind of involved in music. So yeah, the context of singing from a very early age was very much communion and worship and doing it with other people, which, I think was so great. It was made it really, really fun for me.
Is the music that you sing in the Baha'i faith and community, is it worship music? What's the music like?
It's all different. There's really no such thing as Baha'i music in the sense of a genre. It's really everyone that's a Baha'i. The religion is fairly young as far as religions are concerned. It's only been around for, 180 years or so. So it's just the people coming from their own background of music and applying what they know to, whatever they want to sing about, whatever the writings are. So my dad writes choral music, taking the Baha'i writings and setting them to text. And he's like very inspired by Beethoven and by Bach. But, another person might be doing rap music, or it's all over the place.
It's just so unusual to be a part of such a young religion. I mean, there's sort of, the world is filled with these ancient religions. To belong to a newer community we don't have as much understanding of what that means, I guess, outside of it.
Yeah. I mean, the Baha'is too, they're figuring it out every day. But it's a wonderful, diverse religion that's extremely widespread. So as far as how it's practiced, it's really different culturally. It's like if you go to a Baha'i gathering in Vanuatu, they're going to be doing things that are completely different than, they did in my community growing up. And that kind of makes it really fun.
I'm sorry to ask you. First, I asked you for the technical explanation of the singing over time. And now I'm going to just ask you, for those of us who don't really know anything about it, I mean, what are the tenets of the Baha'i religion? The
overreaching goal, I'd say, of the faith is for people to understand the inherent oneness of humanity. That's it. Very simple, very straightforward. And the idea of how it fits into religions at large is that we believe in something that we call progressive revelation, which means that we're monotheistic, one God, and God reveals a message progressively over time. So each religion is simply a progression of the next. They don't actually conflict with each other. It's just an effort by God to further unify the world at large.
So it seems totally compatible with singing and performing, connecting people.
Oh, yes. And music is super encouraged and a really big part of praise and worship. We believe that music is sort of a ladder in which the soul can ascend. So it's, it's very much practiced in every way.
Thank you for telling me a little about it. Let's talk about how the two of you, balance this project with all of your other work. I mean, how does it work? Rachael, you're doing a million things. Vilray, I know you have your own career also. How does this fit into the greater sort of puzzle of what you are both doing?
Well, this is definitely the cornerstone of my professional efforts. I'm sort of generally writing things that I feel like I could be singing, or Rachael could be singing, or anyone could be singing. And so I don't feel like any other element of my musical pursuits are at all in conflict with Rachael and Vilray, and I'm always happy to drop or rearrange anything else that I'm doing to make us happen. But, I write other things. I have a project called The Man of Milan, which kind of takes its inspiration from Nino Rota's music and a lot of sort of Italian film composers of the 50s and 60s, and explores things like that. But it's also songs sort of built around those ideas. So it's a little bit different than this, but, I'm just kind of always writing and always teaching, and Rachael and Vilray is my absolute fave.
I heard an interview that you did a few years ago around the last record where you sang a song and then you told the story that it had been commissioned.
Yes.
It had been a commissioned song. How do commissioned songs work for you?
People reach out, and sort of as the years go by, more and more do. And sometimes it's a song to walk down the aisle, as was the case with Do Friends Fall in Love. Two friends, two hearts, too many nights to count them. But tonight was something new, and I know you felt it too, when we fell into the passion of a kiss. Around the world, we've shared these roads together. Every journey is grand when you're holding my hand. Do friends fall in love like this? The commission on this record is Hate is the Basis of Love. And so that was, somebody reached out and said, I have an idea for a song. And it was a pretty good idea, so I went with that. And it was that she connects with her partner most deeply over the things that they both hate.
That is so interesting, because when I heard that lyric, I thought, there's something political about it. It's sort of like people are bonded together over their, in large organizations and large gatherings.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but absolutely. It's in vogue, I think, to, we don't see eye to eye on the things that we like, but we're against that. So
we sure know what we're against. Exactly.
Exactly.
Hate is the basis of love.
Despising is the wise thing, for seeing if you see things eye to eye. That's another one where people kind of bring up, oh, that's a very modern idea. Somebody at the label was like, well, these are all great songs. I love this song, but I don't think they would have written Hate is the Basis of Love in 1940. And, my general feeling is that they definitely would have. I think they wrote challenging things. I talk about in the liner notes the idea of Gone with the Draft, which is a Nat King Cole song that's all about staying home from the draft because you have flat feet. And so you have an opportunity while all the men are away at war to, get laid, essentially.
When Skinny Me went out with my honey, the boys all started to laugh. But now it's not so funny. They're all gone with the draft. As a sheep, I can't be beat. The boys all hand me a laugh. But since I have got flat feet, I'm not gone with the draft. I used to envy the fellows who had such fine physique. But all they can say is hello on $7.50 a week. When the boys get back and see how I'm doing, they'll be sorry they laugh. 'Cause one can't keep on wooing and still be gone with the draft.
That's shocking. I can't imagine that being on the radio, people in the 40s being like, well, you're all off at war and I'm at home with your girlfriend. So I think if you can write that, yes, obviously nobody actually wrote Hate is the Basis of Love in 1941, but I think if you can write gone with the draft. Any subject matter is fair game.
Well, I guess the question has been left hanging for you, Rachel, about how to integrate all of these different projects in your life.
Yeah, thus far, Lake Street Dive has been my main project, and we've all been sort of fully committed in the band to making sure that that stays at the forefront for all of us, because everyone in Lake Street Dive has other things going on. Bridget has a lot of other stuff. She has her own solo career, and she has another band, and Aki, has his own solo stuff that he's writing, and Mike has 2 kids and is, always working on other things. But we decided when we became a band that that's how we would be doing it 17 years ago. That's when we formed. But about 5 years into that, we sort of said, this is what we need to keep as our priority. But what has been really wonderful about the growth of Lake Street Dive is that it's basically made it so that we don't have to tour as much. And it's even a lot less in the last couple years. I mean, obviously, barring those couple years that we didn't do anything, we've been moving into a phase where we don't have to tour 6 months out of the year. Maybe we can tour 3 or 4 months out of the year, which leaves me with wonderful amounts of time to do more stuff with Vilray. So as far as just a person who enjoys singing all the time, it's hugely wonderful for me to have this other project that's so fulfilling and so wonderful, and to know that, if Lake Street Dive were to pull back at any point, Vilray and I could just do more, because I think right now we do as much as we can, but we always like to do more.
Do you see spending any more time in jazz environments? You mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that up until now you've actually have not really spent a lot of time in the jazz world, even just going to hear music.
No, I do go out and hear jazz a lot more these days. And yeah, sometimes I think about letting that part of me expand a little bit more. And it's so fulfilling to sing Vilray songs, and all that being said about standards and the relationship that people have to them, which is part of why I also drew back from singing them, is that I found it hard to reinvent them myself and feel like I was doing anything. There's some part of me that still wants to make a standard record or two, mostly because it's so fun.
Yeah. It's interesting, there's been another sort of approach to this conversation that's out there, which is like the postmodern jukebox sort of way of trying to take modern songs and put them through a more classic lens. And I think a lot of younger people probably are hearing music that in some way is reminiscent or would remind them of this music, because they might have seen videos by people like Postmodern Jukebox who are taking newer tunes and trying to make them sound old. And something I feel when I see that is sometimes it's great, but just how the more contemporary material doesn't always behave in the same way that those old tunes do. And Vilray, your songs do sort of behave in the way that the old songs do. They follow the sort of classic form, and they lend themselves to improvisation, to solos, the structures. It's not just the melodies and it's not just the arrangements. It's the structures themselves of the compositions that are in keeping with the way standards were written originally.
Yeah, taking nothing from Postmodern Jukebox, which, it's not the kind of thing that lights my fire from a creative perspective. I couldn't do that. But I totally see the appeal of saying, okay, what are the elements of this music that could pull back into this other context? And that's what's so beautiful about creating, is kind of finding these things that turn you on and make you think deeply. And what I was saying earlier about having hard opinions about what you like. And among the things that I like are all the different ways that, it's not one structure, it's not 2 structures, it's not 18 structures. There's so many different songs of this period that kind of subvert this aspect or that aspect, or conform to this aspect or that aspect. You listen to a lot of Disney songs, for example. They're often not these full-blown Irving Berlin songs that have a verse at the beginning and have 3 choruses and have a very pronounced bridge. They're kind of these efficient little machines of melody that can only last 2 minutes and 15 seconds, whatever. They can't be a 3-minute song. They can't be a 4-minute song.
Someday, like Christmas
That's nice to me. And there's something too kind of, okay, well, how do I live in that place? How do I live in the place that is more like Rudy Valley, where it's like the song on this record that kind of speaks to this is a love song played slow. It has this kind of, the first half of it is, I think, probably gonna, if you make it that deep into the record, it's gonna shock some ears because it's just not the way things are done now to spend 2 minutes on an instrumental introduction that plays the entire melody before the vocalist comes in. But that was a world that existed, and working with Jacob, it was great to be able to say, let's try something like that. Let's see if we can keep focus for that, and it's hard even for our modern ears to kind of, I will sometimes be like, wow, this is still going, to me, it's like, that's the game of it, is kind of thinking up, listening to things and saying, wow, that's so interesting. And then saying, could I do that? Could I make that work? I think Postmodern Jukebox is probably asking the same question with a different answer,
I heard you say that earlier today also about having hard opinions. And I stopped myself from asking, well, is there a manifesto? I mean,
No, there's no manifesto, but it's just, the things that I value, they're a little bit ineffable. They're a little hard to explain, but like, I love the way Johnny Mercer writes a song. I love the way Peggy Lee writes a song. I say this in my liner notes. There's something about singers writing lyrics that makes those lyrics incredibly fun to sing. Accentuate the Positive is one of the most fun and delightful songs to sing because Johnny Mercer, you can picture him, taking Harold Arlen's music and just kind of like playing with it and saying, okay, well, how's this going to go? And the way the consonants run together and the way the vowel values just make it so easy to sing.
You got to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, and latch on to the affirmative. Don't mess with Mr. In Between. You got to spread joy up to the maximum, bring gloom down to the minimum. Have faith or pandemonium, liable to walk upon the scene.
So that's a hard opinion that I have, which is just lyrics should be a delight for the mouth. They're the treat. And they're so often the propellant for swing. I listen to lyrics, and that's what I'm listening for, more than, oh, wow, that's such an interesting way to say that. Like, I like an interesting way to say something, but it, to me, is not the main attraction. And so for some other lyricists, I don't think that one is wrong or the other's wrong, but I just think having opinions about stuff like that will give you a signature sound, will give you a way your music sounds.
Yes.
And so I try to listen thoughtfully that way.
Yes. Well, in some ways, that's what's special about this project, is that it's a songwriters project for two singers, but one of the singers is the songwriter. It lives in that space between those classic relationships between songwriter and muse or songwriter and singer, but it also is one of those great, hearing Hoagie Carmichael or whatever, hearing people sing their songs,
Yes,
musicians
totally.
who sing their songs.
Yeah, those are my favorite records too. Those Tin Pan guys singing their own songs. It's always incredible. I mean, even if they're not like Johnny Mercer, one of the greatest singers who ever was, it's always like, oh, that's how those words run together. That's how they meant it, And that's so magical, especially with this sort of stuff. The period is such a rich language. It's so full of vernacular and it's so literate, it's both this vernacular aspect and like I've read a zillion books and I'm out there on the street like making deals and getting drunk but like talking to people, like constantly talking, constantly reading, constantly writing. So these are like incredible fonts of language where they're like out there with humans. They're not like rarefied academics, but they're readers also. So there's a lot to admire, I think.
Does that exist today? Do those people exist? Is that an
I'm sure
archetype?
I'm the wrong person to ask because talk about agoraphobic. I think I am not as social and I am not as literate as I once was. I think post or in this afterglow of the worst of the pandemic, it's worse than ever, but they have to exist, right? I mean, like, I think, but it is that combination of low and high.
Yes.
Where there are people who are like going to plays and seeing theater and writing theater, but also they're like going, you listen to, oh gosh, what's his name? Harry, he wrote 42nd Street and Harold Warren. Harold Warren? Yeah.
Harry Warren?
Harry
Yeah.
Warren.
Harry Warren.
Yeah, exactly. if you look up YouTube videos of him, it's incredible because he's just like the most New York guy you ever heard in your life. But you can tell that he's doing it all.
Yeah.
He's growing up on the streets of New York. He's talking to people, but he also like understands like Greek comedy.
I need a dough, I don't need maybe. The wolf was parked outside my door. And so I wrote the $1 Million Baby from the 5 and 10 cent store.
Right. Yeah. But I also think songs are fantasies, I mean, I know,
Yes.
like Mose Allison said, if I could live the life I sing about, I wouldn't have to write these songs, that we
Yeah, what fun would that
yeah,
be?
we create the environment that we fantasize about, that we crave.
Totally. And especially back then, because it's all like sort of Depression era escapism at a certain point. So, you're right, we're in the money. And you're really existing on a fantasy level.
We're in the money, we're in the money. We've got a lot of what it takes to get along. We're in the money, the sky is sunny. Oh man, depression, you are through, you done us wrong.
Well, this may be a little bit of a leap here, but we are living in some pretty dark times. And
Sure.
there is an aspect of escapism in this music also. I mean, there's a lot of love songs, but also just the feeling of it. What it evokes is a kind of an escapism. And, I hadn't thought of it, but maybe there is something that's like really of its time right now to be making, I don't want to put you in a box because I hope you're able to do this, indefinitely and not have it be pinned to any one historic moment. But there is something that feels like it's kind of needed right now, maybe because life is so harsh and this is so, this is like takes you to another space.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to that, but I do think life is always harsh and there is always, the value and escape into music. And yes, it's true. There's something about there's something about this kind of music that definitely, gets you singing or gets you dancing or gets you. But I think the magic of this music that's particular to it is its power to sing sad songs that don't sound sad. Like Any Little Time is literally about crying in public and it's like a medium tempo bop, like that's powerful and it's a funny song, but it's a real thing, sitting on the subway and not being able to control yourself and just having to have your moment. Like the women that I was saying, would come up to me busking, crying in public. That's a vulnerability that is beautiful that I couldn't really name the song that existed that expressed that. And like, isn't that weird that in all of human history and with all these incredible songwriters that I couldn't draw to mind? I mean, maybe it's out there and maybe it's a classic and I'd be like, oh, I'm embarrassed I didn't think of that. But the song about having a feeling and not being able to control it and not even really being able to identify what it was that made you exude this emotional reaction. I just think that there's something elemental about this music that gives you permission to be like, think up an aspect of life that is universal, sing about it. It doesn't have to be, much as I love Bob Dylan and much as I love the singer-songwriters who come out of it, it doesn't have to be like a specific personal tale of this girlfriend that I broke up with. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be this universal thing that's like, hey, sometimes I'm just standing around and I start crying and everybody ignores me. And thank goodness, because that can just happen. And it doesn't really express an opinion about whether or not that's like a good thing, a bad thing, or like, it's just like, that's a thing that happens.
But I think that that's the sly line that you walk, because you have to, like we started out saying, you have to, you are kind of inventing a universe for each of these songs. Even if you haven't written the entire musical, you've kind of created the values around the song. So there is something sort of personal and direct and specific about it. And I mean, it's just it's a huge challenge that I think that you excel at, finding these universal stories that seem to imply a larger world behind them, and yet are open-ended enough that they're just human.
Well, I mean, to go back to accentuate the positive, it's like, I don't know what is that in a musical? Maybe it is.
I don't know.
But it's expressing the thesis that bad stuff happens and all you can do is be positive,
Yeah.
It's the original Toxic Positivity song.
Yeah.
But like, that's a simple idea and it's very well expressed. I think I'm just interested in these very simple elemental ideas and how they get expressed in this style of music, and how there's an infinite number of simple elemental ideas. So they're available. They're fruit to be picked off the tree. And so, I think there's a lot of room for people to do it. And I think there's a lot of room. I hope people listen to this record and say, I want to do this same thing from a different stylistic perspective, like learning the lessons of this kind of music lyrically and applying it to different music. I don't think there's anything about these lyrics that have to be applied to this music. I just think that's where I'm comfortable.
I have to tell you that I've often felt that when I see something or hear something that I think is really good, it makes me angry.
Oh, no.
And when I hear something that is really great, it makes me feel inspired. And when I heard this record, it made me want to think about what songs I want to write. So exactly what you hope to inspire in people, it generated in me. And I think that is a hard thing to achieve, particularly as a songwriter, to encourage people when they listen to think, I know I'm not going to write this, but where am I and what can I learn from this? So thank you. Thank you for writing these songs. And Rachael and Vilray, I'm doing it. I'm going to punch it in right now.
No.
Rachael and Vilray.
Yeah, you have to replace all the Vilray. Rachael and Vilray. Rachael and Vilray.
Say it 6 times and I can do it. Rachael and Vilray, thank you for talking to me today, and congratulations on the record. I think it's really beautiful.
Thank you so much.
There they were, my friends, Rachael and
Vilray.
See, behind every song, every performer, every record, there's a depth of feeling, thinking, and living going on. I'll be back again in your headspace before you know it. Until then,
Good night.
Good night.
My love.
Good night.
The tired old moon is descending.
I can see it.
Sleep tight,
I will.
my love.
You too.
My moment with you is now ending.
Oh, say it ain't so.
It was so heavenly.
I know it.
Holding you close to me. It would be heavenly.
Yes, it would.
To hold you again.
All right, this is enough. I'll talk to you soon.
This has been a WBGO Studios production. To learn more about WBGO Studios' award-winning podcasts, special concerts, live streams, and more, visit wbgo.org/studios.